Welcome to the Fit Rich Life podcast, a show where we talk about money, financial independence, entrepreneurship, fitness, and building a life you absolutely love. Are you hitting burnout in your career? Or maybe you feel like you're close to having a mental breakdown and don't know what to do. In today's special guest episode, I have a deep conversation with Jess from the Fioneers blog and website about her own mental emotional career meltdown and how she used the concept of Coast FI and Slow FI to completely redesign her life and work. Jess and her husband popularized the concept of Coast FI and Slow FI through their work at thefioneers.com and paved a new way for people to use financial independence to design a life you love well before you reach your FI number. In this episode, here are some things you will learn about. 1, how Jess took a leave of absence to reclaim her mental health. 2, how Jess reframed her relationship with financial independence to build a new life and career. 3, a deep dive into using FU money, Coast FI, and Slow FI to build a better life. 4, a powerful framework anyone can use to build towards their big dreams sooner rather than later. 5, helpful insights for those on the entrepreneurial journey, and a whole lot more. This is a great episode for anyone who doesn't want to wait until they achieve financial independence to live the life of their dreams. The insight, strategies, and wisdom that Jess shares will empower you on your journey to building a wonderful, joyful, fulfilling, and adventurous life well before reaching FI. Please enjoy a wide-ranging conversation with Jess from the Fioneers. All right, everybody, we have Jess from thefioneers.com. Super excited to have her on the show because she has popularized the concept of Slow Fi and Coast Fi, which I haven't spoken about on the podcast too much. So Jess, really excited to dig into your story, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Before we dig into what exactly Slow Fi and Coast Fi is, I want to talk about your mental health breakdown / challenge that you had in your career. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in 2018, I found myself in a really challenging space with my mental health. I had actually in 2017, I had gone back to therapy for depression and some heightened anxiety. I've been sort of in and out of therapy for my entire life. I've been in and out of therapy for my entire adult life. And, I was just starting to feel like this isn't what I want. This is not what I want to be doing long term. But at the same time, it felt like I was so exhausted and so burned out that it was hard to figure out what to actually do about it. And so I ended up staying in the situation and using therapy almost as like a way to cope versus a way to actually help me get out of the situation. And to make a long story short, about 6 months after that, things just really came to a head on the work front for me. And just one day, I had a really challenging conversation. And that night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and I had a 3-hour panic attack. And I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dying. I woke my husband up and was like, I can't breathe and I can't stop crying. Like something is seriously wrong right now. And from there, I mean, I feel really fortunate that I already was in therapy. And I was able to reach out to my therapist and I knew like, okay, I can't go to work today. Like this is not a thing that's going to happen for me. And originally thought, this was going to be a couple days, couple weeks, it turned into about 6 months of taking time off of work because every time I looked at my work computer, I had a panic attack. Anytime I got a phone call, I got a panic attack. It was like there had been this dam almost in my mind holding back all of this stress and anxiety for so long. And it was like starting to splinter. And in that moment, it just completely cracked. All the water came flushing through. And I had to completely stop the flow of water to be able to rebuild it, and to be able to figure out what I wanted life to look like afterward.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people, especially in the US, they go through something very similar, and many people turn to alcohol or food or drugs or other destructive behavior. And I really admire that you're so open about your therapy. I myself have gotten plenty of therapy throughout my journey of life. But I really love how you mentioned that you were actually using the therapy to cope with staying in the same situation versus using it to get out of the situation. So I'm curious uh, how financial independence and taking 6 months off started to play into your recovery from this breakdown.
Yeah. So there were, I think, a lot of things that were coming together, like for me at the time. And so, about 6 months prior to the mental breakdown, my husband had actually introduced me to the idea of financial independence. And so we had been saving, we'd always been savers, and he introduced me to it and gave me a copy of the book, Your Money or Your Life. And I started asking myself the questions in that book. What would I want to do if I didn't need to work for income? And I had a really hard time answering that question because my life had revolved so much around work and climbing the corporate ladder and like being the feminist who was climbing the corporate ladder so I could bring other women up after me. And, felt a huge responsibility for those things. And so I didn't know what I liked to do anymore. I didn't know what I wanted. I just was in that, kind of heads down autopilot kind of position. And so I learned about this, and I was like, I need to figure out my answer to this question, right? And I also started to dive in to learn more about personal finances and financial independence. And there was this like life-changing concept that I heard about. I think it was like several weeks before my mental breakdown. And I was listening to J.L. Collins, his book, The Simple Path to Wealth. And there's a chapter in that book about FU money. And the idea behind FU money being, you can actually use your money to improve your life today. Like that was like a mind-blowing concept to me. Like I had always just assumed like I'm saving this money for like this summer, this like future date somewhere in the future. I never really thought about how my money could help me right now. And so I heard that podcast and it was like, FU money is what you have above and beyond your emergency fund. That can help you, one, get out of a bad situation, or two, take advantage of an opportunity. And I started to take that to heart. And honestly, I think part of the mental breakdown was like my body sort of getting there faster than my brain, like my body saying, you don't have to do this anymore. You have this FU money. Like, why are you continuing to put yourself through this situation that's toxic for you? When it was like, yeah, my body knew it, but my brain didn't know it yet. And so, it was like, and I've seen this happen to other people as well. It's like they get to a point where they realize, like deep down that like they don't have to keep going. And therefore, it's like their body just decides to say, like, okay, you don't have to keep going. Like, I'm not going to let you keep putting yourself through this. And so in some ways, it was almost this realization that I have built some financial freedom and cushion, that I don't need to keep putting myself through this. Right. So there was that piece of it. And then, when I was in those first few weeks of the leave of absence for the mental health crisis, that came up, right? We wondered, like, okay, how much FU money do we actually have, right? And so looking at it and realizing, okay, in our emergency fund, we have 9 months worth of our regular expenses. And then it sort of dawned on me, like, that would be if we both lost our jobs. And, we're saving a significant portion of our income. I'll get a disability insurance during my leave. And, so then for us, it was a decision of like, do I want to take, do I want to just quit? Do I want to take leave and get the disability? Do I want to try to push through and go back? And this sort of conversation around FU money kept coming back to me to say, like, this is really the first time that I'm looking at money in a way, asking, what can it do for me right now? And then in some ways, that experience then translated to so much, like, so many other parts of our journey, right? Because, eventually I used that 6-month time to figure out what I wanted. I ended up quitting the job. And, that time really helped me start to decouple my identity from my job and from my work and my salary and this like high powered position I had worked myself up into. And so when I went back to work, part-time, and it's been a process, because I originally, when I went back to work part-time, assumed that I would increase my hours and go back to full-time, and then we would continue hard charging toward full financial independence. But then about 6 months in, I heard about this idea called Coast-Fi, or Coast Financial Independence. And the idea behind that is that you can get to a point where you have enough saved and invested at your age that it will grow and compound to provide you with a comfortable traditional retirement later. And so that means, there's a certain amount of money that I need now, and that money will grow to be what I need by the age of 60, right? Or 65. And so I learned about that, and I was like, that's awesome. How cool is that? That like you would, this is another way to use your money to design the life that you want right now, not just later. And so I learned about that. I did the calculation, and at the time we were 31. So we had lots and lots of time for things to compound, and realized like we're there. We were at Coast-Fi, which the numbers surprisingly lower than you would expect. I think, for us at our age, our Coast-Fi number was around 250,000 that we would need to have invested, because it will, grow and double every 7 to 10 years. And so that gave us this real feeling of freedom to say, we could actually start like taking steps to design the life that we want right now. And it wasn't that we were saying we're going to immediately cut our income and only cover actual cost of living, which like you can do when you're Coast-Fi, but it gave us this feeling of freedom and this feeling of abundance to say, like, let's use this to figure out the life that we want to design.
I love that. Yeah, a couple points I want to double click on. One, in my own career, I experienced something very similar with the FU money. Different than you, but it radically, once I realized I had FU money, the amount of stress that I would take on from work radically decreased because I realized like, hey, even if I lose my job, like I'm gonna be okay. Like I have more than enough
Mhm.
time to find another job. And I just want to underscore the power of FU money and double underscore like actually taking the time to mentally understand that you're at that point. Because I think a lot of people have FU money, but don't realize they have it. And
Mhm.
they're so stressed about money and stressed about work because they are like, I have to have this income coming in. Otherwise, I'm going to die. But that's like, that's not true. They're going to be totally
Mhm.
okay, even if they lose the job, quit, get fired, etc. And in my own journey, when
Mhm.
I recognized that I had that FU money, I stopped worrying so much
Mhm.
about, you know, getting fired or what if my company doesn't survive or not taking office politics so seriously because I was just like it doesn't matter, I'm going to be okay, I don't need to get wrapped up in this. So I just want to
Mhm.
highlight that for
Yeah.
the audience. The
Yeah,
other really
I think it's really powerful when you realize that. I think for me it was like like it felt like I was getting this crash course in like all of these concepts and I had no idea how to like incorporate them into my life. And so, yeah, like I wish that my reaction had been, I don't need to worry about this.
Yeah.
And my brain did not get to that point before my body did, unfortunately.
Yeah, which is the next point I wanted to talk about. I think our bodies are so wise and they're always trying to talk to us. And you work with people as a coach, I work with people as a coach. And even in my own life, my body will like, kind of knock and be like, hey, so the way you're living isn't working. And like it's a light knock at first, but then it gets stronger and stronger. And then eventually your body's like, all right, you're not listening. And then you have
Mm-hmm.
like a serious health challenge. Um,
Yep.
and I just want to encourage the listeners to just pause and like ask yourself, is my body trying to tell me something about the life that I'm living or the work that I'm doing? And is there some changes I can start to make now so that I don't get to that full breakdown space? Because a smart
Mm-hmm.
person learns from their mistakes, but a wise person learns from the mistakes of others. So I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
hey
Yes.
listeners, if you can hear Jess talking, just take a moment, pause the podcast or after the podcast, ask yourself, is your body trying to tell you something, and is there any changes you can start to implement to avoid that like complete burnout, crash, etc. um, the other thing that I think is so important that many people don't recognize is the power of taking a leave of absence, and that many companies will allow you to take 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, or even a year of paid leave if you just go through the process of like looking into it, meeting with a doctor, having the doctor say like, yes, you have some like mental or physical challenges that you need to focus on. In fact, like I just worked with a client who just took a 6 month leave of absence. And I just want more people to recognize that a lot of companies have great policies in place where you can take that time and still get some or all of your income. And so I love that's a part of your journey, Jess, because I
Mm-hmm.
think more people should take advantage of that, because that is like, you've already paid your dues. You've been working at this company for months, maybe years, maybe decades. Like if you need it, take it.
Right. That's why they have short-term and long-term disability insurance.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper into kind of, I know you took time off and then you went back to part-time thinking you would go back to full-time. but like walk us through kind of like what happened next in kind of your financial independence journey, your designing your life journey, like what came next.
Yeah. So we realized that we had reached this Coast Fi milestone where we no longer needed to save for retirement. And it wasn't, a moment of us saying like, oh, now we're going to flip the switch and just stop completely. But it gave us this feeling of freedom. And so when my part-time job asked if I wanted to increase my hours, I said no, and I didn't. And as my mental health was improving, then I had excess time and energy that I decided not to put toward work. And well, I guess I decided to put some of it toward work in another way because I decided to start my own business, doing life design and career coaching, which worked really well with my HR background. Though the career coaching is a lot more focused on how do you want work to fit into your life, and what is the life that you want. So it's definitely for people who are past the point of caring about climbing the corporate ladder and want to find work that they enjoy doing.
That's real quick. I just want to pause. There's two things. One, we're going to go right back to this. I have it bookmarked in my mind. Yeah. Can we just give a little number explanation to Coast Fi in case someone's brand new to the idea?
Yeah.
So just, simple numbers just in like how it kind of works. So someone who's like brand new to financial independence is like, I don't understand Coast Fi. Like, let's put some numbers to it. And then we'll jump back into you starting your own kind of business.
So the idea behind Coast Financial Independence is depending on what age you are and your annual expenses, you can figure out, one, how much you would need to retire and never earn another dollar, and how much money would you need today that money could grow in the background to get to that specific amount. And so I have a calculator here that I have up in front of me, and I'll share the link to that for the show notes. So imagine that you're 35 years old. You have 27 years until you want to fully retire. Okay. The amount of money that you will need at the age of 62, based on that 25 times multiplier, is about $1.8 million to be able to retire comfortably at any age. The amount that you would need at the age of 35 that will grow based on, I'm assuming, a 7% inflation adjusted growth rate. So average stock market returns in the last 75, 80 years have been about 10% per year. I'm reducing that to 7% because of assuming 3% inflation. What you would need at the age of 35 is only $293,000. That will grow to, which is a lot of money, but it's certainly not 1.8 million. That slightly less than $300,000 will grow to $1.8 million by the age of 62 if you don't add another dime to it. So imagine if you could scale back your work, not save at all, how much more freedom that could give you over the next 27 years.
100%. And if let's say you're in a relationship, that means like both of you are each only required to earn a little over $35,000 a year, and you get to spend all of it. And you don't even have to worry about saving. You can just spend your entire paycheck. And I appreciate you, Jess, for taking the time to just walk us through the numbers, because when I first heard about Coast Fi, I think theoretically I kind of understood it, but it wasn't until I put some numbers to it. And I looked at like, okay, let's say I only had $290,000 in my 401k, but I'm going to like not retire for another 27 years, what would that grow to? And it's like, it's incredible. I mean, from 290,000 to 1.8 million with no additional contributions and that's like one of the things I always like want to share with people is compound interest, like understanding it, like looking at how the numbers do what they do is so incredibly powerful. And I just want to thank you for walking us through the financial part of that. So let's jump back into you starting to do this career transition. And one question or comment that I had is, I literally always thought career coaching was about increasing income, not about lifestyle design.
Mm-hmm. I think usually is. And so
Okay.
actually, originally, I had thought when I was in HR and I was thinking about different ideas of things that I could do, career coaching would continuously come up. That as well as salary negotiation coaching, because I had been on the other side of negotiating salaries for, the companies that I had worked for. And those were just not things that I wanted to do, right? Like was getting to the point where I was saying, I am so much more than my job and my salary and the, position that I have in this corporation. And so I didn't want to reinforce that by doing a traditional career coaching. And so I do what I call it lifestyle design coaching. And career is part of that lifestyle design, right? Because typically the vast majority of us still need to generate income to live. And so it's going to be a big part of our life for the foreseeable future. But it's figuring out what is the life that I want? And then how do I want work to fit into that, to give me the life that I want? And so that's what I focus on with people, and bring them through a lifestyle design process that includes self-discovery of figuring out, what do I really love? What are my core values? And what are the conditions that I need to thrive? Then through a process of dreaming big about a whole variety of different ideas, and possibilities. And then taking those big ideas and translating them into action, through experimentation. So how can we shrink it down and test it out to understand more about the things that we want to do? And so that's the sort of type of coaching that I do in a nutshell. And so I started my first group coaching program in 2020. So about a year after my company had asked if I wanted to increase my hours, and I said no. And I started it thinking, I had really been thinking about that question in Your Money or Your Life, which was, what would you do if you did not need to work for income? And this was one of those things for me. Like I was like, I want to help people design the lives that they want, to like decouple their identity from work and, figure out what's important to them and make those things a reality in their life. And so I didn't expect it to be like a successful business. Like I originally was thinking like, hey, maybe like I'll run a couple groups, maybe in 5 years this will allow me to like semi-retire, maybe I'll earn like 10 to 20K a year or something. And then about 6 months after starting it, I realized like, I've generated more income from this than from my part-time job in the last 6 months. So like this thing actually has legs, which is exciting. And so, there were some changes around that time to my part-time job. So I had a really awesome boss who left. My boss after that started sort of pressuring me to increase my hours, and implying that like I wasn't being a team player by setting boundaries and not wanting to work more. And so I got to a point where I was like, I don't feel appreciated, and I don't actually need to be here because I have this thing that I'm doing on the side that's actually making just as much money, if not more. Um, and so in some ways it's like a very different reaction to something bad happening at work, right? It was me making the intentional decision versus, in my previous case, my body making that decision for me making this intentional decision to say, it's time to go. It's time to take a bet on myself, and on my own business. And so about 6 months, 7 months later, I actually quit my part-time job to just work for myself. And so I have been fully self-employed since 2021, so January of 2021. So during that time, my husband was continuing to work full time. And so, he was still really enjoying his work. And so this didn't dramatically change our income a whole lot. It didn't change our expenses a whole lot. Our income went down slightly. But, so then we were like, okay, what else do we want to do to design our lives? And so this was, travel has always been a big part of my life. That part of the reason why I wanted to pursue FI in the first place was I want to travel everywhere. When I was a kid, I would literally read the encyclopedia about other countries and I would trace maps and just like imagine traveling to them. Right. So this is like not a new thing. This has always been a desire of mine. But it was right after the pandemic. And so we were like, we don't know if international travel is going to be a thing for a while yet. And so what can we do to experiment with this love for travel within our current constraints? And so it was funny because we sort of realized 2021, and we realized like we had both separately been thinking about van life for like 6 months before we started talking to each other about it. And so I had a friend who had built out a camper van, and I was like, that looks really cool. And separately, my husband Corey had been watching like van life YouTubers. And so when I was like, hey, this person who I know built out a camper van that looks really cool, he was like, listen, I have been watching this for 6 months. Let's we can watch this together. Which was, so it was cool. It was a little serendipitous in some ways. And then we were like, okay, so we did a van life experiment. So we rented a camper van in 2021. And it was hard to do because renting camper vans and RVs can be expensive if you're comparing it to like going camping. So we almost didn't do it because we were like, we could just go camping. But we did it because it was an experiment to see, would we want to do this van life lifestyle in the future? And so we did this experiment. We thought, okay, we'll do this one. Maybe we'll do like a month later, and then we'll decide if we want to get a camper van. We loved the experience so much more than we thought that we would, that 3 weeks after the trip, we had an order for a new Mercedes Sprinter van that we were going to build out ourselves. And so, so that for a while was then how we were using our Coast FI status, right? We hadn't decreased our income, but we increased our expenses dramatically over the course of a 2-year period of time to buy and build out this camper van. So our sort of mobile adventure home on wheels. And so for 2022 and 2023, then my husband was continuing to work part-time, but we dramatically decreased our savings. And so then in some ways that gave us some confidence, right? So you'll be seeing a trend here. It's like, let's take little steps and build confidence to make these, larger lifestyle changes feel a little bit less scary. And so we had decreased our savings to around like 15 to 20% in those 2 years, and money was still growing in the background, and like we were still okay, and the business was continuing to grow. And so then when my husband had some frustrating things happen at work, he also got to the point that was like, I can just leave. And so he gave his notice. Then he'd quit his job in 2023. So about a year and a half ago. And that was the point where we decided to fully coast, right? And so we had reached the Coast Fi milestone in 2019, right? So about 5 years ago, we made all of these gradual changes. And then in 2023, we decided, okay, now we're ready to both be entrepreneurs and only cover our actual costs of living. And so once he quit, we could be location independent entrepreneurs. And so we traveled for about 6 months of last year and about 4 months of this year around the country in our camper van while running our business and, you know, doing the things that we needed to from the road. And I think that, I don't know, I feel like the takeaway from the story is that, like, you don't need to make big, massive changes overnight. And I think that's, you know, sometimes people in the FI space are like, oh, I'm going to reach FI and then I'm going to like immediately make all of these big changes. When in actuality, like making big changes can feel really scary. And our scarcity mindsets flare up. And I would be lying to tell you if I told you that our scarcity mindsets like didn't flare up through this process. However, I think if you can take those small steps, right, and make those incremental changes, each one is easier, right, than taking that one big scary leap at the end. It gets to a place where it feels like I'm using my financial freedom. I'm building the evidence for myself from my own life that like I'm going to be okay and I can trust myself. And so, yeah, I would encourage everyone who's listening to this to focus on what small incremental changes can they make to improve their lives over time, and those will build.
Yeah. That was the takeaway I was going to like double click on and come back to, because that's like, even in my own journey. So, because I know a lot of entrepreneurs listen to this show. Like I didn't just wake up one day and was like, I'm going to launch online fitness and money coaching program. There was all these little things I did along the way. And I can't remember if I shared this on the show or not before. But 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years before I started online coaching, I started a financial independent meetup group. And so, so I did that for a few years. And then the pandemic hit and we took it virtual. So we started doing it over Zoom. So basically I was, learning from people who were ahead of me on the financial independence journey, helping people that were behind me. And then when it went virtual, then it was suddenly like I had the training wheels to like lead a group coaching like seminar. And I did that for like 2-3 years. And so I built up the skill to actually be able to like host like a mastermind or a group call. And, I had always dreamed about doing online coaching, but it was like, what are the little things that I can do to start building towards that next dream? And I heard this concept. I was rereading the book, The Gap and the Gain. And the one of the co-authors made this said this idea that really stuck with me, like achieving a goal isn't like one big thing that just happens. It's a bunch of tiny little micro progresses that lead, like it's literally potentially hundreds of little pieces that get you to that goal. And I think a lot of people, they have a goal, but the goal is so big, so far away that they'd never start on it. But what you're saying here is like, what is like the like small next step that I can take in order to start to move towards that goal. And I think for anybody who has brought some of their dreams alive, it is just like, what is that next small step that I can take? So I really love that you kind of illustrated that in your own story.
So I think it's really important to also talk about like, how do you go from what is this like big pie in the sky idea that you have that you're like, I can't imagine how that's possible. Because that's how I felt about starting a business and coaching and running retreats and being a location independent entrepreneur. Like those were all things that I was like, these feel really pie in the sky and very different from my life today. Like I couldn't possibly imagine how could I start? Like, what are those small steps? And so when I work with clients, we go through a pretty formulaic process to figure out what experiments that we want to run. And we specifically call them experiments because the focus is on learning something, right? It doesn't matter whether whatever you're experimenting with is conventionally successful or not, because the focus of an experiment is whether you learn something valuable. And if you do, then the experiment was a success. The first step in figuring out how to translate that big idea to action is write down, okay, so you have your big idea, and then you ask, what questions do I have about that idea? So that's the very first thing to do. And so we can use an example. So one of my big ideas was I would love to run retreats someday. And I do now, but at the time it was like, this would be awesome. I have absolutely no idea how to get started on it. I have no idea if anyone would come, right? So my questions were like, one, how do you run a retreat? Two, would I actually enjoy it? Three, would people actually come to these? Like four, how much would I charge? Where would I have it? Right? There's like all of these questions. And so the first thing that you do is write down every single question that you can think of. And one important thing too is there's limiting beliefs that are going to pop up. That are going to say like, you can't do this. You could never make money doing this. You're not X enough, right? So the key thing here is when those come up, translate them into questions, right? So instead of saying you could never make money doing this, say, how did people actually make money doing this? Do they? Who has? Right? Or like, you don't know how to do this, or like, what would be required? What kind of skills are needed? What kind of, and sort of switching those into questions to answer. Okay. So then once you have all of your questions, you can then start to brainstorm. And I encourage people to brainstorm, like do a really broad brainstorming of what are all of the ways that I could think of to answer these questions with an experiment. So not internet research, specifically an experiment would be a conversation with a person, right? So reaching out to somebody who's done it, who's a couple steps ahead, or in the process right now. An observation, or participating in something. So like going and seeing like, someone else doing what you're considering doing. And then the third is a beta test. So it's like, how can you take this big idea and shrink it down to answer some of your questions? Okay. So for me on the retreat front, some of the things that I started to do was, who do I know who has run retreats? And can I set up conversations with them about why did they do it? How did they get started? How did it go? What were their learnings from it? What was the best thing about it? What was the worst thing about it? What did they charge? Right? All of those things. The second was the observations. So I started actually attending events. Imagine that, right? Like going to retreats and, really starting to get a sense of here's the things that I would like to do at a retreat. Here are the things that I would do similarly or differently from what they're doing. Like, here's the unique angle that I feel like I could bring to this space. Right. And then the third one is, how do you take the idea and shrink it down to test it out? Right. And so one of the things was like, I don't even know if I would like doing this. Like I imagined that I would, but I need to figure it out. And so similar to you, I went and asked if I could do a live workshop for one of my local FI meetup groups. And, I loved the process. I loved putting together the presentation. I loved the process of actually delivering it and like figuring out like how am I going to get people talking to each other as well as listening to me, and how do I actually get them make this something that's sticky for them. And then another thing was it built my confidence because people actually came.
Yeah.
Right? Like people showed up to it. And so then I was like, oh, great. Like now I see, and now I'm ready to take like the next bigger step. And then the pandemic hit. And so things went online and I started doing workshops, and, that came around to coaching. And then a couple of years later, actually launched my first retreat. But the idea there is you want to come up with like, what are all the ways that you can think of to answer these questions? And it's great to do that with a group of people who have different experiences and connections and everything, because other people might be like, oh, well, I know someone who did something similar to that. Maybe you can just have a conversation with them. And so it's definitely helpful. So there's that. And then once you have that whole list, you can choose, here's the handful of things that I want to start with to focus on answering these questions. And then you take action. And as you're taking action, it's important to do two things. So one is reflect on like how you feel in the moment while you're doing it. Like, does it actually feel good? Are you energized and engaged in that process? And then after the fact, to reflect on what you've learned. And then decide what is the next experiment that I want to do and what is the next question that I want to answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is so awesome. I just want to, so I basically did this, but unconsciously. Mm-hmm. So when over the years, and this happened over multiple years. So the funny story is I actually tried to launch an online fitness coaching business like 7 years ago, could not get a single person to sign up, and it was heartbreaking. I literally put so much work into doing this webinar where I get people to come, and then at the end of the webinar, encourage them to sign up with me. Not a single person signed up, and I was like destroyed. I was like, I remember crying, like, because I tried so hard. And I kind of like put that dream on the side. I was like, oh, I'm just not cut out to like become an online coach. But then over the next several years, I started befriending successful online fitness coaches. Like I just became their friend and like followed what they did, hung out with them in person. And then I started getting more of my own coaching in different areas, in career and sales coaching. I joined some masterminds where like these big time coaches were holding masterminds with hundreds of people. Then at my 9-to-5 job, I asked if I could do like during the all hands, like a 20-minute lunch and learn where I would take a concept like a mindset or personal development or teach a skill, and I would just teach it to people through either speaking or having them go through an activity with me in real time. And so like I was doing these mini experiments, like that didn't cost me anything. It was like, oh, my company's happy to have me like add to the all hands meeting and make it more fun and dynamic. And then all those little mini experiments like led to eventually, like I actually was talking with one of these online coaches, and I told him like, hey, I'd love to do fitness and money coaching. And he was like, oh, that would be awesome. Why don't we start a business doing that together? And he already had a successful online fitness coaching business. So he knew how to do that side of it because I'd spent like 4 or 5 years doing these financial independence meetups, I knew how to coach the money side, and we launched the business that way. But this happened over like multiple years, all these little experiments. And I love how you actually broke down a crystal clear framework, because I feel like I could have got there in like a fifth or a tenth of the time if I'd gone through the framework that you just shared with us.
Well, and I think it's an amazing thing too, because I think there's some people who naturally have this experimentation approach and mindset. And those tend to be the people that you see that you're like, how are they successful? Like, what did they do? Right. And I think it's that they naturally had this mindset of saying like, I'm just going to be curious about this thing, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to ask people, and I'm going to talk to people, and I'm going to try stuff out. And, you know, or when you think like, oh, it just seems like there's certain people who like get all the opportunities. It's because they are taking action and putting themselves out there and talking to people and experimenting and like doing this stuff. And it doesn't come naturally to everyone. And so, yeah. So I found that it's important to like break down the process to say like, how do we actually go from big idea to small action?
Well, what I love so much about what you just shared is I actually think it's a skill that you can develop. So like, because if they just take the framework that you've shared and then they start to put it into play, they will develop this. And essentially, in my mind, this is like the skill of entrepreneurship that you're teaching, like in this like big, you know, big idea, big dream process that you're having people go through. Because I think not everyone, but I think many, many, many people have like, oh, I love to do this thing that is like their own thing, where they're not working for someone else, but they don't have that natural, you know, built-in entrepreneurial skill set. But I think those people could for sure learn it by going through the framework that you just provided us. So I absolutely love it.
Yeah. And then it becomes like muscle memory over time.
Yeah.
It's like, that's
100%.
just like the way that I approach things now, you know, and if I like want to make a shift in my business or make a shift or like anything, it's always just like, oh, well, this is an experiment that I'm learning from right now. What did I learn from that experiment? Like every step is the next experiment.
Yeah. Oh, this is so great. Off air, I want to talk to you about something because I'm recognizing I'm going through this process again with the next evolution of my career. But now you gave me a framework to like consciously understand what I'm doing subconsciously, if that makes sense. Yeah, sorry, audience. We may not include that part in this because I'm not ready to share where I'm going. But one thing so the next piece that I want to jump into is the entrepreneurial journey and the productivity, self-imposed deadlines, etc. But before we go there, we've kind of talked about it, but we haven't formally given a name to it and spoken about it. And you're so well known for this concept that I want to make sure that we don't brush over it without giving people the philosophy. And that is the philosophy of slow fi that you've been talking to us about. But like, let's get some definitions, some examples, and like share with us, what is this philosophy of slow financial independence?
Yeah. So I created the idea of slow fi in particular when I was wondering, like, are there people who are specifically choosing to slow down their financial journey and design a life that they love and reach fi later? And like, is that okay? And like, how do they feel about it? Right? Because I was in that process of saying like, okay, I don't want to increase my hours. Do I want to quit? Do I want to be an entrepreneur? Like, what could that possibly look like? And then I started finding examples of people just like coming out of the woodwork, and ended up doing over 75 interviews with people who were choosing to slow down their financial journey to design the life that they wanted now. So people who had become entrepreneurs, people who had decided to go freelance or reduce their hours at work or found a job that was a better fit for them or took time off and did a mini retirement or sabbatical. Or people who were taking a semi-retirement approach where they left work earlier than reaching their fine number, but were still generating income in enjoyable ways. And so that gave me a lot of confidence to say, like, hey, like maybe I do want to, slow, like it's okay to slow down my own financial journey to focus on enjoying my life. And then around that time, I was also getting into the ideas around the slow movement. So slow, like slow living, slow food, slow travel, with all of the focus being like, it's not necessarily about the speed in which you go and do any of those things, but it's about the intentionality, right? So are you making an intentional choice? And so the idea of slow-fi was born from that, of saying the focus around slow-fi is I'm going to intentionally use the financial freedom that I'm building along my journey to eventually reach this full goal of financial independence, but I'm going to use it to design the life that I want along the way. And so that's really the essence of what slow-fi is.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel this is such a perfect time for me in my own life to have this conversation because, and maybe you can help me kind of like conceptualize it in my, like what's going on in my own life. So technically my wife and I are financially independent at our current lifestyle, but we live in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area, where purchasing homes, like a tear down home, is like $1 million. Um, and so we rent a very nice place, but in order to get the dream home, we have to get to a significantly higher net worth. And so I'm at this crossroads in my own financial independence journey where do I pursue more money at the fastest rate possible to get to that dream home in the Bay Area ASAP? Or do I slow down knowing that no matter what, we will get there, but I can actually take my time to design a life and work? Because I actually love to work. I just don't like to work all the time. And I don't like to do work that's not interesting to me. Like there is a part of me that deeply enjoys like creating and being productive, as long as there's time for other parts of my life, like my health and my fitness and my relationship and time in nature and those things. And so like I had these, basically I have my ego and my heart slash spirit battling over which route do we go. Do we just like, let's make as much money? Ego's like, let's make as much money as possible so we can get that dream home ASAP. Like, who cares about the quality of your life? And my heart and spirit is like, no, slow down. You can design a life and a work life that makes just as much or more money than the way that you know or that you've done before. But you're going to have to slow down temporarily to figure out this new iteration before you can get back to that level.
Yeah.
And you will regret not trying to figure out this new iteration versus going back to what you did to achieve your first level of financial independence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm listening to you talk, and it sounds like you have talked yourself around to an answer.
Yes,
This.
I have, but I still almost a few times a week, my ego is like, nope, let's go back to the enterprise sales job. You know, you can make a ton of money doing that. But then my spirit and my heart is like, no, let's just like keep working on this. We don't have to
Mm-hmm.
stress. We're fine. We're
Mm-hmm.
more than coast fi.
Yeah.
Maybe we're at we're
Are you
FI.
coast fi? You should. One thing that might be helpful to figure out is, are you coast fi for that future um, cost of living with the dream
Yes,
house?
we are. But I
Yeah.
haven't crunched the numbers to see, like, do we get there
Mm-hmm.
in 5 years, 10 years? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep.
maybe that's part of the thing, is I actually need to go crunch the numbers and
Mm-hmm.
understand. Because I
Yeah.
think that is one thing for me and potentially other people, is when I don't understand how long it's going to take, I kind of just like freak out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think like so much of anxiety, at least for me, and what I've learned comes from not knowing what we don't know, or like
Yeah.
from the unknowns. But if we can figure out how to answer those questions and make those things more known, then we can make a plan for it. Because then you would be able to look at the numbers and say, okay, we would be able to do this in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Like, are we okay with that? Right. Because I'm also, what one question that I was going to ask you is like, how important is the house to you?
Yeah,
Um,
which is a very powerful question. So for me, it's sort of important, but not that important. But I
mm-hmm.
have this belief in my mind that it's extremely important to my wife, which
Is
may
it?
or may not, I don't know.
Uh huh.
And it's like we've had the conversations, but I haven't really driven into that aspect enough to understand, is she okay if it takes us 5 years or 10 years to get to that
Mm-hmm.
dream home? Or
Yep.
does it need to happen in 3 years or 2 years? You know what I mean? And I think
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know that, I'm creating this
Mm-hmm.
external pressure that, like, oh, if I don't do this, my wife is not going to be
Mm-hmm.
happy. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, that's like, through our conversation, I'm like,
Yep.
wait a minute, I need to go and have a deeper conversation with
Mm-hmm.
my wife and
Yeah.
understand, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, is it okay if we get there in 5 years? Is it okay if we get there in 10 years? Is it okay if we
Mm-hmm.
get there in 20 years? Like, and she'll probably have some sort of sense, like, oh, it'd be great if we could do it in X years. I could
Mm-hmm.
be okay with it taking it even longer at this period, but
Mm-hmm.
right now I have no
Yeah.
concept. And so in my
Mm-hmm.
mind, it's like, I got to get there next year or she's going to be
Yeah.
unhappy. And it's really important for me
Yeah.
to be a good husband and make my wife happy.
Yeah. I mean, so it sounds like getting specificity on that is very, very important. And I would also say that, it sounds like you have a strong partnership. And I imagine that there's some give and take that can happen within that partnership too. That if the trade off is you going back to a job and being miserable so that we can have the nice house in a year, like, she's probably not going to say, yeah, do that.
I already know she's already said, Justin, like, you don't have to go do a job that you don't want to do to get
Yeah.
us the house.
Yeah.
And instead,
Right.
she's like, I believe that you can figure out how to make lots of money in a way that really works for you. Like, I believe in you.
Mm-hmm.
But then I still go and create this external pressure for me, for
Mm-hmm.
myself. But that is just like, I know that's one of my habits, is I create
Mm-hmm.
external pressure
Yeah.
for myself. But I'm at this place in my own journey in life where I'm trying to consciously remove that pressure so that I can be more present
Mm-hmm.
and in my own life. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it was great. We're doing a coaching therapy session for Justin, everybody. So thanks for bearing with us.
Of course.
Well, I think this transitions perfectly. Well, first and foremost, thank you for that insight. I have some conversations
Mm-hmm.
to have with my wife. I have some numbers to crunch. So I think that's super helpful. But I think this segues nicely into the next part, because I know a lot of entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs listen to my show. And I know you've had to go through this yourself, is managing your own mental, physical, emotional well-being in your entrepreneurial journey, talking about things like how productivity, self-imposed deadlines, like the fact that entrepreneurship can kind of be pretty lonely if you're trying to build something yourself and not like, if you're trying to build the solo business or one person business. So talk to us kind of about your own experience and finding that balance so that you're, actually enjoying your life while you're building your own business and not being your own, nightmare task master.
Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a work in progress. But one thing that I would say is that it was actually incredibly helpful for me to start building the business on the side of my day job. And the reason for that was there was no pressure, right? Like my mindset around it was like, this is the work I would want to do if I were FI anyway. If I didn't make any income from it, I would still like, this is still the work that I would want to do. And so it was helpful to build it without having the financial pressure. There was certainly ego and emotional pressure that went into it, but the financial pressure was not there because I did not need the money. So I could build it up in a way that I was structuring it as like, this is the work I would do if I didn't need to generate income. And so one thing that, even now becoming a full-time entrepreneur, one thing that I do actually on a monthly basis. So I do a monthly reflection on my business and what I'm doing. And one question that I ask as part of that reflection is, how does my business feel to me? Like, am I tired? Am I working too much? Like, how are things going and how does it feel to me? And there was a time in there where I felt like, oh, I'm doing, too much. I'm feeling tired. And so I scheduled a every other week Thursday off should list day. So no shoulds. It was all should lists. That was just focused on, I would wake up in the morning and I would say, what do I want to do today? And it could not be productive or work related at all. It was all what's on my want to do list. And so I sort of gifted myself this should list day every other week that really, really helped to sort of bring me back to like, this is the purpose of like why I'm doing this is so that I can, live this life and explore and be curious and, do the things that I want. So there's that piece of it. And then, there have been times where I've realized like, the structure of how I'm doing this like doesn't totally work for me. And so I know for anyone who's entrepreneurs out there, if ever you have like a sales cycle or like a launch period where like you have an open cart for a period of time, like that is for many people at least, that feels like an emotional roller coaster, right? The highs are high and the lows can be really low. And it often happens in a really condensed period of time. And so for me, I realized like, why am I putting myself through this? Right? Like it worked, it was successful, but like it didn't feel good. And so over the last year, I decided like my biggest goal in my business was no more live launches.
I love that. Oh my God.
Yeah. And I'm still working on it. But the key thing for me was saying, okay. And I actually worked with a consultant on a couple of sessions to like work through the process of like, what's the real issue here and what are the bottlenecks and like, how could I go from filling most of my group programs in these like 1.5 week long live launches to having it be a pre-enrollment process that happens over the course of the entire year. And then like, they're just pre-enrolling for the next cohort. And so I took some steps to put some, automated, like, funnels and various things in place. We don't need to get into the specific details. But that was a huge goal for me. And my question that I asked myself for this year has been like, will this thing serve my goal of no more live launches. Like it was like just sort of this constant thing that was like top priority for me for the year. And so one thing that I will say is for my group coaching program for the fall, I had 8 spots. 7 spots got filled with people who pre-enrolled. And I only had 1 spot left when I actually quote unquote launched. So it was like the easiest, chillest launch that I've ever done. And so I think part of it is saying, like, how does your business feel? How do you want it to feel? And then how can you actually solve that problem and close the gap and like get from here to there? Because having your business be something that you enjoy doing is going to have a higher impact on the people that you're serving in the long run.
100%. This is so helpful because it's just like I'm in ways in such similar spaces that you're a bit ahead of me, but you're helping me like potentially be the wise person who's going to learn from some of the mistakes. Cause like, I'll just speaking openly, like I, am working on a course and I've been like, do I want to do the live launch thing? Where it's like this huge push to get a bunch of people signed up. And I already know my spirit is like, Justin, you didn't achieve financial independence to push yourself through that stress. So we'll see if I stay true to my heart or if I go with the ego who wants the big live launch and the big, sales. But it's so funny listening to you because I'm like, oh God, I already know what she's talking about because I haven't even done a live launch for a course or a cohort, but I know the pressure because I can feel it even though I haven't done it.
I think there are ways to reduce the pressure though. So we can talk about that
Okay.
offline too, but I can just tell you now. I would like, I'm just generally someone with very high anxiety. And so, that's what happened with my mental breakdown. My anxiety just went through the roof. And I know that about myself. I've always had high anxiety. And sort of after that experience, when I worked through it, I realized like regular people just don't experience this high level of anxiety all the time that I had experienced for my entire life. Like I just thought it was normal. And so now I realize like that a general low level of anxiety is not normal, and very heightened anxiety over like, oh, is this going to work? Like that's also doesn't necessarily need to be normal. And so one thing that's been really helpful for me is to focus on what am I putting into it? Right. So let me focus on the inputs and to some extent the outputs and leave the outcomes, like don't get invested in the outcomes. Right. And so to say, what can I do? And what do I want to do? I want to communicate as clearly as possible. I want to help people who are in the right place and would benefit from the thing that I'm offering. I want to make sure that this thing gets in front of them so that they have this opportunity to be able to change their life. And then whatever happens, happens. Right? Yeah. From there. And for me, it was like, I was able to get to that point for like the live launch that I did in January, and really like get my mindset to the right place, for that one. And I seriously was like, if I don't sign up anyone, like I'm totally fine. Like, this is great. I will just learn from it, and then I ended up signing up 3 groups of clients, and I was planning on signing up 2. And like, and it was all just, and I think it was because I was approaching it in the way of saying like, all I want to do is make sure that you know about this opportunity, and I want to communicate it clearly. And if you want it, you want it. If you don't need it, that's okay. And so I do, yeah. So I think there's that mindset piece around letting go of the outcome that also can really, really reduce the stress of live launching too, if you do decide to go the live launching route.
Yeah. It's hilarious. So 2 weeks ago, I finally got to this place with my coach who coaches me, who was like, where in the session, I finally got to that point where it's like, why don't I just have fun building it? And I don't care if no one signs up. Like, ultimately, I'm financially independent and I could just give it away for free, but I will feel so good that I built something that could be of service to people. Because the way I think about like what I'm building is like, this is what I wish I would have had when I was in my early 20s. And if someone had said, here's this course, it will save you a decade of pain and struggle, I would have been like, oh my God, this is what I'm looking for. And I think I'm like to that place, but of course, like I try to, like, my ego's like, no, we got to focus on it being a, a commercial success, a financial success. But my spirit's like, calm down, like, just build it, have fun, learn. You love learning, like, unattach yourself from it being finished at a certain time, and just like focus on exactly what you said, Jess, which is like the input. Are you putting an effort into it in an amount each week where it feels like you're making progress? And the input and the progress, that's all that really matters, because progress is what makes me feel happy. When I feel like I'm making progress on something I'm interested in, whether it's in like physical fitness pursuits or, mental, emotional, spiritual pursuits, it's just the progress that I love. And so, like, uncoupling myself from the outcome, I'm like almost there. And I'm kind of like going back and forth, like the ego and the heart/spirit are kind of going back and forth, but it's just like perfect timing that I'm having this conversation with you right now. Cause you've obviously gone through some similar things. And the other thing I want to draw out, just as a side note for the audience, cause I know at some point, many people that listen to this podcast either are financially independent or will be. I think the benefit of achieving a certain level of financial independence, whether it's Coast-Fi or FU money or full-Fi, is you can actually build the things that you want to build with no pressure. And I'm showing you that even though I shouldn't put any pressure on myself, I'm still putting pressure on myself, but I'm trying to get out of doing that. And so maybe if you can recognize that you don't need to put as much pressure on yourself, if you're well on your way to FI or already FI, like, hey, you can build something just for fun and you don't have to worry about how well it does in terms of it making money.
And the thing that I have seen and experienced is if you can, like, I don't know, like the people who are the most successful are often the ones that are having fun with it
100%.
And not putting pressure on themselves.
So
which
true.
Is a very difficult dichotomy to deal with.
Yeah. And, it's something I like. One of my mantras is, and it's a mantra because I like have to tell myself, is the more fun I have, the more successful I am. But I fall out of that all the time. I'm like, no, I got to like push and grind. And then like my spirit is like, oh, let's just have fun. And when I actually have fun, I am so much more successful than when I'm trying to just like grind and push through it. So yeah, but you're totally right. It's always like, there's so many people who whether it's in the financial independence community or other areas that have like just built something out of pure curiosity, pure interest, and then it leads to massive financial success, but they weren't going after it for the financial success. And I know that's the route I want to go, is like, let's build something, have fun. If it doesn't make any money, cool, let's build the next thing, like, and just have fun building. So awesome. Cool. Well, this has been super powerful. I appreciate you being so open about your, mental health challenges, about your journey to Coast Fi, about your entrepreneurial journey, not making it be like it's all rainbows and butterflies, but you've gone through your own challenges and struggles. And, as we start to wind down this podcast, I like to ask every guest to share a tip, tool, or strategy, one for fitness and or health, one for money and or wealth, and one for life and or happiness. So what do you got for us, Jess?
So my fitness tip is, and this goes along with what we were talking about. What my biggest advice is, find some type of physical activity that is really fun for you. So for me, that's hiking and being outdoors and climbing mountains, and that is my ideal thing that I want to be doing. And I get a lot of fitness benefits out of it. So I would encourage people to search for something that's fun, and then you're going to see success in that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so true. And it's okay if it changes over time, because I think we go through seasons where like one physical activity is really fun for us, but then we kind of get bored. And that's when it's like, okay, let's go find the next thing that brings out the excitement, because I feel like having fun taps into spirit, and like spiritual energy is like infinite and renewable, whereas like discipline is and willpower is finite. So if you can tap into fun and tap into spirit, like you're just going to be so much more successful in your fitness journey. So I love that.
Awesome. So the money or wealth tip that I would encourage people to do is to like really understand your numbers. So understand like, what do you want? What is that going to cost? And then where are you in relation to that? And what changes can you make? Or what shifts to downshift can you make now and still reach that goal? And so we did talk about this, but I think one tool that's incredibly helpful is understanding the idea of coast financial independence and getting to the place where you only need to cover your actual costs. That can provide a tremendous amount of lifestyle freedom. And so would encourage everybody to figure out like, what is that coast fi number, and have I actually achieved it already? And use that to give you a feeling of freedom to start making some life changes.
I think that is so important, because I think so many people on their financial journey, they don't get clear on their numbers, what they're spending, what they need to live the life they want. And once you get clear on those numbers, like it just releases so much like unnecessary stress and mental load. And so I love that one. That's so good, Jess.
And then on the life and happiness piece, I would say my biggest advice is to build a community with people where like the thing you want is just the regular normal thing that people do in that community, so that if what you're wanting to live, and I assume people who are listening to this want to live their lives in unconventional ways, and they want to do really cool things with their life. So surround yourself by people who are just living life in that way, so that it feels normal. And you have this encouragement and these people pushing you forward, and you don't need to feel like you're always going against the grain.
I love it. That's so true. you know, all the studies on longevity always show that it's having relationships with real people that not just longevity but happiness, right? So whether you want to live a long time or be happy, taking the time to build those relationships and be in community with the people, like Jess said, that like are what you want to do is their normal thing. And I think that's such a powerful strategy for happiness and living a life worth living. Well, Jess, thank you so much for coming on the show. I do want to mention, for those people who are interested in Jess's work, she has an incredible blog, Fioneers.com. Her and her husband have a great podcast on YouTube, the Fioneers. And you are also going to be opening up pre-sale for your Slow-Fi retreat in September of 2025, in November of 2024. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. So we'll be hosting our third annual Slow-Fi retreat, where we'll bring about 40 like-minded people together who are wanting to build unconventional lives in the very beautiful setting on Lake Tahoe, to spend 3 days together focused on lifestyle design and building financial freedom. That'll happen the retreat will be in September of 2025, and tickets will start to be available in mid-November of this year. So check that out on our website at thefioneers.com.
Awesome. And we'll put links to everything in the show notes. So to Jess's blog, her and her husband's YouTube, and any other links that Jess wants to share with us. So Jess, thank you so much for coming on the show. I deeply appreciate it. If people do want to connect with you online, is there an Instagram, or do you just prefer them to go your website? What's best if people want to reach to?
Probably the easiest way to reach out to me would be on Instagram. So we're on Instagram at the Fioneers.
Okay.
So feel free to follow us, send a DM, and then also check out our website and YouTube channel.
Great. We'll put your Instagram link in the show notes as well. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show, Jess.
Yeah, thanks for having me.